today's session, we'll be doing the sixth session, or the fifth session actually, of the different sectors related to the National Inventory Report. And for these training series, we've been looking mainly at the data collection, the data that's required for each of the sectors to help the country in its preparation for its first BTR and its National Inventory Report. Today we'll be looking at the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector. And as usual, showing the agenda that we've taken through. So we've gone through most of the sessions already, most sectors. So today we'll be looking at AFOLU sector, the data collection input, and then we'll also briefly look at some of the methodologies where it's necessary for understanding context. I know our colleagues here, at least those who are in forestry, are expert in the methodologies, but like I mentioned, we'll be focusing mainly on the data side. And so an overview of what we'll be looking at. We'll start with the agriculture sector. So we'll be looking at livestock, manure management, and soils. And then we'll take a look at category 3B on land. So that's the forestry and other land use sector. And then we'll be also looking at some non-CO2 emissions on land. So all of these fall under the IPCC subcategories. And as usual, along the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or turn on your mic. I know we're a small group today. So yes, please feel free to stop me at any time. Okay, so just to give a short overview of the entire sector, AFOLU. It's named this way to combine the agriculture and the LULUCF sector. So you might be familiar with the term LULUCF. This is the term used for forestry and other land use sector, land use change, and forestry sector. They're interchangeable, but for the purpose of this session, we'll just be calling it AFOLU in general, and then the land use change part we'll be calling FOLU, but they're interchangeable. And so this sector includes CO2 emissions and removals from carbon stock changes in biomass, dead organic matter, mineral soils for all managed lands. And we'll be taking a look at definitions for what managed lands mean. And so for all of the classifications, the land use classifications, forest land, cropland, grassland, wetland, settlements, and other land. It also covers CO2 and non-CO2 emissions from fire on managed land, nitrous oxide emissions on managed soils, CO2 emissions from liming and urea application to manage soils. I know that from your last greenhouse gas inventory, liming is not one that's included, but just for information purposes. It also includes CH4 emissions from rice cultivation, CO2 and N2O emissions from organic soils. And then in the agriculture sector, you have methane emission from livestock, from enteric fermentation, which is the fermentation happening in the stomachs and the gastrointestinal systems of large animals and ruminants. And then also emissions that are coming from manure management systems. So how the manure, the passing, the feces of different livestock, how they're used to treat soils and enter into the natural atmosphere, as a result, causing emissions. And so this is a picture of the different sources of emissions and potential sinks in the AFOLU sector. So of course, the obvious, you have the tree, which is a major sink, anything green, anything biomass, that's a carbon stock. has a carbon dioxide sink, and then once it's cut or harvested, it turns into harvested wood products. You have your livestock there, who their manure, they go into the soil, sorry, causing methane emissions, and also from manure, adding to different cultivation activities, addition of fertilizers, emissions coming from the anaerobic um, anaerobic gases as a result of rice cultivation in the absence of oxygen, and etc. Also from fires and uh, leaching into water from soils, etc. Well, probably should have put these boxes up earlier. Yeah, but there you go. And usually many of these sources are uh, those that are producing methane are a result of methanogenesis. So that goes for livestock and for rice, for example. And then you have, oxidation happening where you have combustion, where you have uh, sources that are producing CO2 emissions, right? For example, from uh, liming, urea, burning of fires, etc. Also land use change. And just to give a little bit more context, land use change and management have a significant influence on greenhouse concentrations in the atmosphere. And globally, AFOLU is the largest emission sector after the energy sector. And globally, this is mainly a result of deforestation, agriculture emissions from soil and nutrient management, as well as from livestock. And so this represents 20 to 24% of net anthropogenic emissions, um, which is probably a little bit more, which is probably more in recent data, right? And also to note that a significant proportion of emissions from the AFOLU sector comes from developing countries, um, mostly as a result of having the developing world is often where you have a lot of the uh, crops and agriculture, as well as faster paces of uh, land use change as a result of shifting to developments and other land uses. So let's take it one at a time to look at the different subcategories. And I mentioned we'll be looking mainly at the data today. But before we go into 3A in livestock, I wanted to put a snapshot of what is in Suriname's inventory from your most recent greenhouse gas inventory from the Third National Communication in 2023 for the AFOLU sector. It said generally the AFOLU sector on a whole is a net sink. Um, and the dominant source of that sink is, of course, the forestry and other land use, so the carbon stocks, and then secondary source being agriculture, and the inventory, the AFOLU inventory covered basically all of the subcategories in the AFOLU sector, except for liming. So it had enteric fermentation, manure management, rice, N2O emissions from soils and manure, and urea application, and the highest of the agriculture being rice cultivation, followed by managed soils, then enteric fermentation. And it also noted that there were quite some improvements made in general, especially on the FOLU side from your last inventory, from I think it was your last forest reference level, and that you you had some additional tier 2 factors for certain biomass and stock change factors. So there were some updates that were made, and I suppose updates also in the land use classification, right? And deforestation maps from GIS, using the GIS based tool. And also it says here that it also now include country specific data or emission factors for manure management. Maybe it's country specific data, right? More data, and also country specific data for rice and manure management, which I think is good. This is a good way to start with showing the clear improvements from one inventory to another. I'll just take a pause. You have any questions? Yes. Angeli?
Not necessarily a question, but I'm wondering if someone from agriculture is also joining this group, especially for the manure management.
That's a
No,
good.
unfortunately, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we couldn't reach anyone from agriculture. We had in the past we had Iwan Samunda, but
Mm-hmm.
he recently went to the NMA,
Mm-hmm.
the Environmental Authority. So now his colleagues, I'm not sure why, but we couldn't get anyone
Reach them.
to yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's what the status is.
Okay, thank you. No, because this data would be from them, probably. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. No, good question. That was also my question early on.
Yes,
But it seems
yes,
that there is very clear in the, at least in the documentation, that data was available for the agriculture sector and the forestry and other land use sector. So I would imagine that this sector would be probably the easiest to compile in your next inventory. Sorry, Consuela, I see you had your mic on.
yes. Just to share also within this group regarding that what you said about the second source of emission worldwide is coming from land use, land cover changes, right? And indeed, is that also the case in Suriname? In our part, it's mostly due to gold mining activities, where you have the most of the deforestation happening. So I just wanted to share that also with you guys. And indeed, for forestry and other land uses, we had some country specific data that has been used for updating the emission factor. Nevertheless, still it's important to continue with national research as it comes to the removal factor of our forests. Because I think, Brittany, I think you know better and can maybe explain that better. We do have a lot of forests, but when it comes to capturing or removals, it's not that of a big amount when you compare that with emissions coming from deforestation. So that perspective people have, like we have a lot of forests, 93 percent of forest, and it seems that we capture a lot of CO2, yeah, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, um, versus the emission that we are emitting, right? So I don't know if you also have some explanation or clarity on the amount of removal versus the amount of when you have a deforestation, the amount of emission that is coming into the atmosphere, that amount is a lot when you compare that with the standing forest we have and the removal, the little removal they how they say they capture from the atmosphere. Yes, that I want to share also. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Consuela. Yeah, that's very important. And I'm sure that you know better than me on the status of the forestry. If you like, I this is the information I pulled from your last inventory. Probably you or the team there would be able to know more if there's more recent information available. German?
Yes, I wanted to comment on what Consuela said. I'm not sure if this was the case within the negotiations, that this was one of the reasons some countries were not in favor of standing forest, because it's basically you get an equilibrium. It's equal what is emitted versus what dies, because when you have standing forests like ours, um who is basically, that I'm not sure if this is the word, if it's a virgin forest, it basically um trees dies, and when a tree falls you get emissions from that source, and also photosynthesis. So it's basically the amount captured is also the amount released. Some people, that's the how do you say that? That's
The
the
discussion.
argument, yeah, the
Yes.
discussion
Mm,
within the negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the
Yeah.
things, when we are negotiating something, we need to fight for, because we don't have the data to to
To
share, or
justify,
to
to
justify
share.
what
Yes.
we, yeah, that we need
Exactly.
to get support for this, because that's
Yes.
their argument, that it's equal, what you are capturing versus what is lost or emitted is, yeah, somewhat equal, so you don't deserve anything for that,
payments or credits
yeah,
or so
payments
forth.
or something, yeah. So this is one of the discussions also.
Exactly. Exactly. We
Mm,
need evidence. We need evidence that our forest is still capturing a good amount of the carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere. And yeah, yeah, I believe there is some of an amount that is still being captured and that it's not balanced out. I believe that, German, but again, we need to have the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's true also. But I think when you have a blank piece of land and you plant a forest, I think that forest will have
More.
more
Yes.
carbon than a standing forest. It will capture more, because a standing forest, most of the trees already
Yeah.
they
they're
have their
absorbing their
maximum.
capacity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
their capacity is already reached, or they will die out and release all that carbon. It won't be released at once, but it will eventually be in the atmosphere again. So that's the argument. The new forest, or the forests that are being planted now, capture more than our standing forest. But our standing forest has more value in when you think about flora and fauna and biodiversity, we have more value. But when it comes to
Exactly.
capturing carbon, it's another it's another thing.
yeah. Okay, now I think I'm getting, a good context of this situation. Yeah, yeah, I agree that you definitely need evidence, and so I think the way that Suriname is going about it with, continuing to do more research and studies and getting more of these studies for emission factors for the different forest types. I'm not very familiar with the all the forest different forest types that you have, but if you said it's mostly mature standing forests, um, then yes, you're right. You'll have less absorbent CO2 capture over time than, for example, a secondary forest. But uh, yeah, no, there's lots of evidence that you could that you could give, if considering that if you were to you know have 50% of your virgin forests cut down and then regenerate into secondary forests, that um, you would potentially have more emission capture, carbon dioxide capture. But it's not, yeah, it's something that requires more research and from folks like you, Consuela, and others that are working more in depth in that sector, and my colleagues that work with this every day, like Coalition for Forest Nations and other NGOs like that to help with this, especially with that negotiation, backstopping with the
Yes.
evidence. Yeah, that's really invaluable. The world would be a different place if we didn't have the existing sinks, even if it's virgin or secondary regenerating forests. Um, but I think you all are on the right track with getting your evidence in country already and continuing to, um, put in your work in updating your different files and your different emission factors. That gets you closer and closer to trueness to what the sink capture, the sink potential of your forests are. Um, so just to confirm before I move on, it says here that your forests, your AFOLU sector is a net sink, but overall the country is not a net sink, right? Or am I wrong? Or is that wrong?
Overall, we are a net sink. Sorry, I'm eating something. Overall, we are net sink.
Hello. I
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
Oh, Consuela, you
Sorry.
wanted to answer? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, I missed the part because my Wi-Fi how do you say switch? Sorry. I would like to ask to repeat the
Sure.
thing you said. Yes.
I just wanted to confirm if Suriname overall is a net sink for all emissions and removals, not just this sector, but overall for energy,
Yes.
all overall net sink.
Yeah. Overall net sink based on the calculation done for the period 2000 until 2017.
Mhm.
Yes. So
To
we
be
need to
updated.
update. Yes, we need to update. And Brittany, as you may know, also different tiers, different sectors. So there was a question also from the audience how to really exact know if you are a net sink if you have different tiers. So that was also a difficult question to answer. But I think after asking experts about this question, they say you better have something to have an idea of what the status is than nothing, right? And then it is a stepwise approach. Then it needs to be improved along the way.
Right.
So yes, that's
Yeah,
yeah over.
that would be my answer too. Yeah, we're given a set of guidelines to follow, and developing countries have, you can use more flexibilities than, for example, developed countries in putting your greenhouse gas inventory together. You focus on your key categories. So of course your uh, land use change sector is a key category, and so that's why you have more, higher tier emission factors, and you get more country specific to the sectors that matter the most. And then from there you keep improving, but you start somewhere. So I think you're on the right track. And not noting that
Yes,
it's not just Suriname using different tiers for different sectors. So that's that's all countries. We just have to do with what we have. Okay,
correct, correct.
great, good discussion so far. Okay, let's go into livestock. I know we don't have a big agriculture crowd here, but let's see how far we go. So livestock emissions from 3A, category 3A, results mainly in methane emissions, so that's CH4, from enteric fermentation as well as manure management systems. So this is all relating to, um, to livestock. And also you have N2O emissions as a result of manure management systems once they're applied to soil. And of course, we have the three methodological tiers. And by now, I know Anjali is probably an expert in all of the different tiers that we've been going through for all the sectors. So, of course, starting from the most simple and first order approach, using default values, and using activity data. And you can even potentially use default data based on global data sets, if you don't have all national data. And then as you go up, you have more accurate approaches where you use more country or region specific values. So for livestock population and feed characterization, these are the two things that you really need when you're looking at the livestock sector. Angelique?
No, you can go ahead. I just want to say that for livestock, number of livestock the Ministry of Agriculture has this data annually, just the number of livestocks, and also the dairy cows and milk production. And I was wondering if you have this, if you could calculate your manure out of it, or should you have a specific survey to do that?
Sure.
But
Great.
we have this. I'm gonna put it in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, you've been excellent in providing all of the tables for all of the different sectors as well. So good. We'll take a look at manure management, the data that you need for that in a little while. But specifically for livestock, the main information that you need is the basic characterization of the actual livestock. So what are the livestock species that are available in countries, the annual population, which you said is available. And then even which is still considered basic characterization, to know like what the purpose of the animal is. So for example, especially for large ruminant animals like cattle, cows, to know if they're used for dairy or if they're used for beef, for example. They have different set of emissions that they emit based on their purpose, and usually because of the food that they eat, right? And then as we go more into higher tier methodologies, which I know the country is interested in, you go further into defining the livestock subcategories. You know what type of food they eat, how much food they eat, you know, and know information like that, so that you get a more detailed understanding of the emissions that result from the diet. So we took a look at these. Okay, and these are the main categories for the livestock categories, and like as Angeline mentioned, these are already available, and I saw it available in the last national inventory report as well. So at least for the main livestock categories. But as you can see here, if the more classified, the more you can characterize the livestock, whether it's just total cows, but if you can get into dairy cows, cows for beef, or if you can get into the age of them, if they're young, then they also have different emission factors for each of these sub characteristics. And the same goes for other type of livestock. Other ones being swine, lambs, chicken, etc. Yes, Angeli? I see you put
So
something in the chat.
yeah, I just put for you what we have. I am sure that the Ministry of Agriculture has more data. So I will maybe try to contact Iwan and ask him who is the person who is taken in his place, because for the data that you actually need, the feed, the more disaggregated data, I
Mhm.
don't know if that is published, if it's published data, and I should ask them if they have it. I'm sure they have it, but I think you need someone from agriculture to get access to that. But
Yeah.
the what I shared, what the data that I shared for you, the Ministry of Agriculture every year they publish their agriculture statistics report. So the basic data is just annually, but for the other, someone would have to help us. I think. I mean, someone from agriculture or maybe
Mhm.
German knows. Yeah.
Great. Great. This is yeah. Go ahead, German. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we did receive some data from agriculture. I'm not sure if Iwan was the one who sent it. I think he was the one. He sent the data, but just don't have a new focal point as to say someone who will be joining the meetings from now on. But we do receive some data until 2023, I think. So
Okay.
I think their published report is also included.
Yeah. So the published report has that data is they share that with a lot of stakeholders. But what Brittany wants, like the more in-depth data about feed, is not in their annual report. So for certain items, maybe they have it, but they don't put it in their published data. Sometimes there is more. So we really need to find a focal point. Or yeah, I can ask Iwan or just who is taking his place.
Indeed, that we didn't get that information indeed because we were busy with processing the data. That's
Mm-hmm.
missing, but I think we can just ask an expert in the agriculture sector to just expert just judgment. I think
Okay.
Brittany just to know how much, for example, dairy cows eat a day or in a year, and how
Oh
much
yeah.
chicken eat.
So you
So
can do
just
estimates. Yeah.
yeah, just an average.
Yeah.
That's also permittable.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Great. This is excellent. And I just want to make a disclaimer that you already have the minimum requirements for making a good estimation for enteric fermentation. So you have the livestock population. Um, if you have, for example, the weight of the animals, the feeding situation, whether they're grazing or if they're fed a certain amount of food, how much milk they produce, the annual amount, the average amount of work performed per day, percentage of females that give birth. These are all optional, and then they help to develop higher tier emission factors. So even if you request it and you don't use it for this inventory, you can have it on your list to open up do a survey, do a study for the next time, just as a suggestion, as an option. German? German?
Yeah, yes. When we were busy with the data for the for the agriculture sector, I had a question regarding the cows or dairy. You have two categories: milk and for what do you say? Who say here,
Beef.
please?
Beef.
Beef?
Beef stuff. Food.
Beef and yeah,
Fruit,
for
Meat.
food.
yeah. For
Yeah, for
meat,
food.
yeah.
Yeah, for meat. Yeah, meat production. But the dairy cows, when they don't produce milk anymore, they also will be slaughtered for their meat. So I was trying to make distinguish the two. If I'm How do I calculate it? How do I put it in the
Oh,
categories? That was something I had.
yeah, that's a good one. That's a tough one. But I think important is that you don't double count. So if you have the original purpose of the animal is for milk production or for beef, the amount of emissions that they produce, at least during the majority of their life, let's say from uh, 2020 to 2025, you have the same 10 cows. Five are for beef, five are for meat. Maybe if it's the same 10 cows, then it might be five and five. And then maybe coming to 2025, it might be like maybe it might be eight for meat production and only two for dairy. Maybe they change their purpose for those last 2 years. It gets very technical, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can also write that you're making the assumption that the population that you're showing, livestock population that you're showing um, is, you're saying that that is their main purpose. So maybe they have, like you said, maybe in 1 year the dairy cow is for dairy and then it ends up being for meat. But at least you choose one for the year for emission purposes, and you make that assumption and you can go ahead. I would say we don't need to overcomplicate it in this particular situation, unless you have the data saying that, okay, now we have more beef cattle because the dairy cattle have aged out, or whatever the case is. But only if that data is collected that way, then you can report it that way. Otherwise, I would say don't worry too much. But they have one main purpose for that year, for the purpose of calculating emissions. And also the difference in emissions is not so much, it's not a big difference, so it should be okay. Okay, good. I see some thumbs up. So I explained a little bit about the feed intake. This is for tier 2 characterization. I won't go much more into this, but I think it would be good for when you're speaking to your agriculture experts to see what additional information they have on feed intake, on the age of the different livestock, if they collect it that way, for example, the type of food they eat, or if they're in pasture, or if they're given a certain type of diet. But I wouldn't worry too much. Okay. So we're going to just briefly how to calculate these things. And I know we're scared of equations, but this helps us to know the type of activity data that we need, right? So for enteric fermentation, to get the emissions for tier 1 method, your emissions in CH4 and methane, you would need your emission factor. So defined by livestock population. So in the IPCC guidelines, you'll have tables for emission factors for how much methane is produced for each type of livestock and for each purpose, dairy, beef, etc., or a calf, or lactating mother. There are different emission factors for the purpose of the animal. And then you have N here. N is the number of head of livestock. So this is the main activity data that you need, which you have already have met that requirement. And we didn't go into tier 2 as much, but this is where you would need your gross energy intake. So the amount of energy in terms of calories, in terms of megajoules per each per head, per animal, per day, right? So this is where the information that you get on their food intake would help to understand what this looks like. So this is just some of the activities that you would have to show to get what this gross energy for animal performance is, such as the activity that they do, how much work they're doing for different parts of growth in their life, for pregnancy, etc., lactation. Yes, and good morning, good afternoon to our colleagues who have just joined as well. Welcome. We're doing a session on agriculture, forestry, and other land use for the purpose of putting together the National Greenhouse Gas Inventory report for Suriname. And we're looking at the activity data requirements, so the data that's required. Welcome. Okay, and here we are. So we'll have default emission factors for livestock, which is available already in the IPCC guidelines. And then over time, if you wish to go more specific into the type of livestock that you have, you can do tier 2 based on studies, as well as the annual livestock population per year is the main data requirement. So in summary, this is it for enteric fermentation. Currently, the country, I believe, is using tier 1. You're using national data for your livestock, which is good. Enteric fermentation, free to use tier 1 is not a key category, but I believe it is a key category in your country. So it would be suggested that over time, you go to using country-specific data that take into account this gross energy intake of each of these types of animals. This is a nice summary. We went through this just now. Divide the livestock population by subgroups. You can characterize them each by their age, by their purpose, uh, seasonal influences, etc., based on their population numbers. You find the emission factors for each of the subgroups, for each of these livestock, and you multiply them to get the emissions, the methane emissions. Okay, so we'll go into manure management. And so manure management, when we talk about manure management as a source of greenhouse gases, we're talking about the production of methane that's produced during the storage and treatment of manure, and also from manure deposited on pasture, in fields, in the soil. So the most favorable conditions for methane production are when large number of animals are managed in a confined area, for example, dairy farms or swine and poultry farms, where manure is disposed in liquid-based system. So that's where you have CH4 production at its highest, when you can when everything is confined together. And the main factors affecting methane emissions are the amount of manure produced by each type of animal, and the portion of manure that decomposes anaerobically, so without oxygen, that are influenced by the storage conditions. So this is where we have the management of manure, because it's usually in agriculture systems, if they're stored, sometimes they're stored in a slurry, or this is especially for swine and poultry, because of the nature of the manure is more liquid, so it's stored in that way. How long it's stored, and emissions and gases are building, and also the temperature, right? So you have more emissions being produced in where you have warmer temperatures. And just so that you know what I'm talking about, especially for those who don't work in livestock and are not familiar with livestock and manure management, these are some of the main types of manure management systems. And this can be found in the IPCC guidelines, table 10.18, and they define what it means. So, so if you know that the majority of your cows are just pasture, just range, which means that the manure from the pasture is just allowed to deposit wherever the cow goes, or maybe for horses and buffaloes, usually big livestock. They're just allowed to pass manure in the pasture. That has a different set of emissions than, for example, solid storage, right? Where the storage of manure typically is done for a period of several months in different unconfined piles. So they're just piled up in the farm or stacks. And then perhaps they put some bedding, some straw material on top. And then there are different systems. There are different systems for example, for chickens and poultry, especially like this liquid slurry, or for example, even in lagoons, right? Where you can, in some farms, they have uncovered anaerobic lagoons where they collect manure and then put it in a lagoon. And it causes different set of emissions than, for example, if it's just left in the field, in the soil. So to be able to calculate how much emissions that you're getting as a result of manure management, you're going to if in terms of methane emissions, of course you have an emission factor for each defined livestock population. So the IPCC guidelines provides these emission factors already for how much emissions result from pasture, from liquid slurry, an anaerobic lagoon, etc., for each type of animal. And then, of course, the number of livestock species. So it's the same activity data here, this N is the same activity data that you'd be using for livestock you use for manure management. In this case, you would just need to know what type of manure management is covered for each of the different livestock types. Yeah, and emission factors, of course, are already in the guidelines based on the characteristics. Okay, so just to recap, tier one method requires a collection of livestock population. And then I think to go a little further, where it was used in your inventory, in your last greenhouse gas inventory, you can also know what is the manure management usage data. So this is sometimes where you get information either from expert judgment or perhaps the farm, farm managers would be able to tell you the portion of manure managed within each system. So for example, if you have a population of 100 cows, maybe we have 50 cows that are in range, and then we have 50 cows where we collect their manure in a pen or in, wherever they're confined. So if you're able to collect that information, you would know, but you'd have to know that based on the total population. So this is usually where it gets challenging to find this information. Usually it's done by expert judgment unless it's recorded. Otherwise, you use default assumptions for what the different livestock manure management systems are, which can be very different from what is actually happening in the country. So this is my question now. Do we know if this data is available, or if assumptions know where to find the data for the type of manure management system for each type of livestock?
No, we didn't get that. I'm not sure if Anjali have his asset. What we got
No.
was just the number of heads, how much of each type of animal, but not where they are free range or in a confined place.
Okay.
So Brittany, we don't have this data, but I'm sure they have it. But it's not shared. I mean, like I was saying, it's not shared in the report. But yeah, I need to ask. German, do you have contact with Shayla Alja? She's from the statistics division. I could ask her if they have the data.
No, I don't know that person.
But oh, because Shayla is head, she is the head of the statistics division. This
I see.
report, so I can contact her and just ask her if she has it or who we have to contact to get more information. I'm gonna ask her. I can
Okay.
also give you her number if you need to
Yes,
contact her.
that would help us. Yes,
Yes.
please.
Yeah.
You can put it in the chat if you want.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Super. Yeah. Okay, good. So this data is available. I would also, apart from reaching out to the person that you'll reach out to, I would also suggest that you also take a look at or make a question to the team who did your last inventory, because it's possible that they collected some assumptions, but maybe it's not very clearly documented in the report. Maybe it doesn't say the percentage, but maybe they have already some information that they collected from the last time, and you can combine the two sets of information you get. Just a suggestion. Okay. And in the same way, I think we covered and understand well manure management systems, it's a little bit different. You use the same activity data for the most part, as well the same as for livestock for enteric fermentation. And then the more that you can define what type of manure management system for each type of livestock, the closer you get to truer emissions. Otherwise, if you use default manure management system, the assumptions that are in for the region, for Latin America and the Caribbean, it could be very different than what is happening on the ground. Especially since you have this is one of the higher emitting sectors in the country. Okay, this is just a summary again. So we know you divide the livestock population by the different types of animal types, and you find the emission factors based on each subgroup for manure management system. You can either use the default or you can use those that you've identified based on the type of animal, and you multiply them to get your methane emissions. Your methane emissions. Now there's also the N2O component from manure management system. So where you have just the manure being itself, doing its own thing, it's creating emissions and producing methane. You also have when you have direct nitrous oxide emissions occur when you have nitrification and denitrification of nitrogen contained in the manure. So there's also nitrogen, and so it produces N2O gas. And so emissions of N2O from manure happen during storage and treatment, and it depends on the nitrogen and carbon content of it, and the moisture, acidity, etc. And then there's this also indirect emissions that result indirect emissions of N2O gas that result when you have nitrogen loss that occur primarily in the forms of ammonia and nitrous oxides. And the fraction that's excreted from organic nitrogen is mineralized, etc. And you have also these indirect losses that just volatilize. We won't go too much into the details of the calculations for each of these, but I just want to draw your attention to each of these emission calculations, right? So this is for direct nitrous oxide from manure management, where you have, where you have the data that you need being the number of animals. Of course, so this is the same from methane emissions as well as from enteric fermentation. But you will also need the annual average nitrogen excreted based on the type of species. So this is where you get more specific. So these are kind of the factors that if you want to go into tier 2, you would need to do studies to do a study on how much nitrogen is excreted for this type of animal. But if not, you can use default emission factors. You can also multiply it by the fraction of total annual nitrogen excreted, and then your emission factors. And then you know also based on the type of manure management system. So these are just some of the different factors that you would need to have, such as the annual nitrogen excreted for that type of animal. And then emission factors would be the annual nitrogen excretion for each livestock category. And you can get these from your default emission guidelines, or they're based on, and they would be based on those that are in the region. So those who have a warm to temperate atmosphere, and also based on emission factors that were collected from different countries in Latin America and Caribbean. Okay. Do you have any more questions on agriculture? If not, then we'll go into land. Okay.
No,
No, I
no
don't think so.
questions. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay, great.
But
So
I think it's important to in this process also to have a one-on-one with the previous person, and this is Iwan Samundar, who has had the lead for agriculture, because I think he knows a lot, and maybe also ongoing activities in order to improve the data. He might know some of that also. So maybe on another session with him about the improvement or the data for agriculture. Just my suggestion.
I would second that too.
all right. Well,
Yes, we are planning to have a meeting with all the experts from the third national communication and maybe others who helped us with other things as well.
great. All right. So you have your work in front of you. So this is good. This is positive. Thanks for that. Okay, so let's look at land. And what we'll look at is mainly the key carbon pools. We'll look at the land use and management categories, and we'll look at the data requirements for forestry and other land use, mainly. There's so much to learn about the land category, and there's so much in-depth knowledge and, you know, information that can be shared. But for today, we'll be looking mainly at the data requirements. And of course, if you have any questions, I'll pass it to Consuela for any of the detailed questions on your forest and land use change inventory.
Yes, I will try to answer those. Yes.
For any of the detailed questions that I probably don't know. I know about the data. Okay. So we covered agriculture. Now we're looking at the other half of the AFOLU. We're looking at the FOLU. So so the use of managed land as a proxy in estimating land-based emissions and removal. Um, so when we're talking about uh, emissions and removals in terms of the IPCC and what's considered in a national greenhouse gas inventory, we're referring to uh, we're referring to defining anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and sources and removals by sinks based on those occurring on managed land. And so, what exactly is managed land? Managed land is land where you have human interventions, practices have been applied to for production, social functions, anything that's managed that is traceable, that's been has some type of human intervention, right? So the IPCC makes this very clear. And so this, in terms of doing your national inventory, the country also has the right to define what it means by managed land. So this has to be nationally defined and classified transparently and consistently. So this is usually the starting place for your forests, your forestry inventory, your forest reference level, to have a definition of your forest, to have a definition of managed land, what you consider within the scope of your national emissions and removals for land use change and forestry. And it says here, emissions and removals need not be reported for unmanaged land. So if there's also a definition for unmanaged land, you can also make that very clear. And so this sometimes is where you draw the clear line between what you're able to track and manage versus what is outside of human, human intervention, anthropogenic sources. And so when we're talking about land use, we're referring to 6 land use categories. So once a country has divided its managed from its unmanaged land, you'll have to further subdivide your national territory into 6 land use categories. And so these are defined by the IPCC guidelines. And these 6 land use categories form the basis of estimating your greenhouse gases. And then each land use is further subdivided. So we'll go into that a little bit later. But you have these 6 land use categories at the top level. So you have forest land, cropland, grassland, wetland, settlements, and other land. And then as you go further, you will go defining land use change between each, right? So you'll have forest land that remain forest, you'll have forest land that was converted to a cropland, or perhaps converted to settlement, or other land for mining, for example. I'm not sure which category it would be converted to. Probably settlement, right? And etc. Right? And then
Correct. Settlement.
correct
Yeah.
settlement, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and then so you have that vice versa. So you'll have a whole land use matrix of all the different land that you consider in your managed land and where they're converting to. And then also the IPCC defines 5 carbon pools for each land use category. So within each of those land use categories, you have carbon pools. So whereby you have living biomass, which is split into above ground biomass. So all that's living biomass that's above the soil, stumps, branches, trees, etc., foliage. And then below ground biomass, all living biomass, that's roots within a certain distance and size, etc. So all of these have carbon absorbing potential. And then you also have it in your dead organic matter. So dead wood, litter, uh, all non-living biomass, for example, woody biomass, also including litter and fine roots on the surface. And then there's also carbon in the soil itself, right? So we signaled this a little bit earlier, but each land use category is further divided into land remaining in that category. So forest land remaining forest land, you'll have cropland remaining cropland, and this is year to year, right? So we're interested in knowing land use change and land use for each year. So at the end of the year. And then as a result, we'll know what the total emissions are, CO2 emissions and removals based on how much carbon you have in each of these types of land use subcategories, right? So definitely you'll have more carbon in your forest lands, and then you'll have the second most in your croplands. You have, there's still carbon content, but maybe not as much as in a mature forest. And then going a little bit less, you have less carbon in your grassland, much less in your wetlands, settlements, almost none. Other land, basically none, right? So yes, German.
Yes, I'm not sure. There was a discussion when we were busy with the third national communication, and I'm not sure on this subject. That's why I'm going to ask it. In the IPCC software, I see a category for burned land. But if you could speak a little on this, the shifting cultivation, how that is seen within the IPCC guidelines, if it's seen as um, something where emissions should be counted, or they see it as if when the area is burned, the forest will eventually recover and it will be just an equilibrium, or it should be calculated. So it wasn't clear then. So that's why if you can speak on this a little.
Sorry, my mic was off. Yes, we will talk about biomass burning. Just give me 1 second. We'll talk about that, especially when we look at 3C and soils, right? Are you referring to disturbances for forest fires? Are you referring to, like, for example, when you're burning residue at the start of agriculture?
Mostly agriculture. So 3C,
Okay.
2, I think it's
3C, okay. So
yeah.
we'll take a look at 3C2 right after we finish 3B. So I
Okay.
won't forget you. We'll go back to biomass burning.
Okay.
Okay, great question. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Just give me 1 moment here. It's my screen. Okay. Okay,
With
so here
me?
we are.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, waiting on your slide. It is indeed an important remark notification made by German because it is something we have been dealing with from the Forest Cover Monitoring Unit as shifting cultivation itself had the area, the combination of secondary forest and the patches where they do the agriculture has been classified as shifting cultivation area, right? And it has been reported previously as or under forest land, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we recently implemented a new approach where we indeed had, how do you say, classified shifting cultivation as a disturbance of forest land. So it's more focused on the activities done within that specific plot. So yeah, I am also interested in how we can figure out to classify or report this specific activity as it comes to emission as an
Mm-hmm.
emission source. Yes, over.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Um, thanks, Consuela. Yeah, I think definitely when it will be, and this is where your expertise is better than mine. When you're defining your land use categories and you're doing your own self classification, you're putting all the different IPCC categories, and then you're defining what are your national categories or subcategories that fall under uh, in this case, I guess would be forest land. So you're saying that you would have shifting cultivation as a part of forest land. Kind of, is that shifting cultivation is kind of like fallow, like a fallow land where it's
No, it's traditional agriculture within the interior.
okay.
So
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 it's yeah. You go
it
ahead,
can
German.
it can be just a forest. They will cut it down and then burn everything and use the ash as fertilizer. So
mm-hmm,
it can
mm-hmm.
be a forest, it can be a grassland, but most of the time it's just a forest they will cut down.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, so I guess it depends on, it comes back to my same comment. It depends on what you define as forest land, and in some cases it would be grassland. At some part of the timeline, that plot will be forest, and then it will be maybe grassland after it's burned, and then it will be cropland for maybe some time, and then maybe it's left to regenerate, I guess, go back to a forest if that's the part of the practice. But then that would go more in correct, okay? So that would go more into the definition of what you consider a forest, cropland, and grassland within the plot. You know what the resolution is reading in that plot for each year, and if you're classifying it as a disturbance. I think that's if that's the way you've been going. That's more than likely the way it is. It's just you would also need to then be able to cover the emissions that you get from soil, which is a little bit different. So that's biomass burning from on the soil. You have different emissions as a result of that. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I might need to come back to that because you don't want to double count those emissions. But if you're covering it already and treating it as a disturbance, uh, perhaps it's already covered. But yeah, that one.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. That's all.
Yes, we have for now for the new methodology we are implementing. We have kind of covered that as a disturbance in forest land.
Okay, so
But
temporary. So you're
still,
considering it forest, and then it's temporarily disturbed, but the intention is that it will go back to a forest.
and then specifically on that part, I think we need some guidance. Like, indeed, it will grow back to secondary forest, and then how to count the the removal part from that transition, right? But yeah, I'm not there yet, but yeah, we're trying to figure that also out.
Yeah, that one. I may have to put you in contact maybe with some of my forest expert colleagues from um
Yeah.
Belize or maybe Guyana, other places. I know, for example, like Belize developed emission factors for uh, secondary forests as a result of this type of agriculture practice, that it went from a fallow for many years and then it regenerated it went back into secondary forests. And so they took samples to make not country specific emission factors for that type of forest, for that type of activity, to then get a better, more accurate estimation of how much emissions they're regenerating, they're absorbing during the time that it's a secondary forest versus um, versus grassland or when it's in its cropland use.
Yes.
I
Nice to know.
Okay. Okay, so we're coming down to it. Some of the main principles. So we're already getting introduced into some of the more advanced, some of the more advanced techniques, which would have to be covered and, with separate interventions, separate meetings. But to go to the basic key IPCC principles for estimating emissions and removals, the simplest methodological approach for getting these estimating the greenhouse gas is multiplying the activity data times the emission factor for each type of land use type. So the activity data will be in area, could be in hectares, for example, of each land use subcategory, multiplied by the emission factor for that type of land use in the moment. So just briefly into the three tiers. So the easiest tier, the simplest, is the first order approach where you have default values of the parameters for each of the land use types from the IPCC guidelines. You're already far past that. I think you are Suriname's forestry AFOLU inventory is mainly tier 2 and going into tier 3, right? And maybe you have a couple tier 1 subcategories. But tier 2 would be going into country or region specific values instead of general defaults. And then you can go further into higher tier methodologies where you're using different modeling tools and measurement systems and data to see at a greater resolution what is happening specifically in each, in each plot of land, and to identify the land use change there.
Yes, mostly we're on tier one, and for one specific study that has been done, we got the tier two as it
Okay.
comes to growing stock
Okay.
for primary forest. But indeed, we need to have a national inventory, mostly because of the amount of forest we have, and specifically on the removal factor. So we would like to also have that to be able to go or to step into the tier two for every other category. But for now, mostly it's tier one. And for primary forest, based on a study that has been done, we have a tier two there. But definitely we need more research and data to, yeah, have evidence of on that part of removal.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, it's good already that you have tier two for the most abundant forest type, right? So that was the place to start, and then you can, go further, and maybe through a study or a bigger project to find emission factors for and establish sampling plots for the different land use subcategories. Great. Decision tree for now. And so when we're talking about land representation, so you have here, according to the IPCC 2006 guidelines, activity data is defined as data that you need to understand the magnitude of what human activity is resulting in emissions or removals. And so the IPCC proposes three types of approaches to generate this activity data. So these approaches are how to generate the activity data that you need when referring to land identification. So these are not presented in a way that one is better than the other. These are just three approaches. So approach one is where you have your land use represented in area totals. So in terms of area, in terms of hectares, within a defined spatial unit, often defined by your administrative borders, everything that is covered on the territory of your country. And so only net changes in land use area can be tracked within the boundaries. So this here is only no areas of each land type at the beginning and at the end. And then for approach two, this is providing an assessment of both gross and net losses and gains. So you're assessing both losses and net losses and gains. So where you can know the transition between each type. So you know how much the transition between each land use type. This approach two includes information on conversions between categories, but tracks these without spatially explicit data. So you can know what is happening, the conversion that's happening, but you're not using any spatial data to do that. And then approach three is you're tracking land use conversion on a spatially explicit basis. So you're using remote sensing. You get, land changes on each parcel of land. You can see exactly what's happening on a more closer basis. So approach three extends approach two by allowing land use conversions to be tracked spatially. And I think for your inventory, you're using approach three, right?
Correct.
You use
Approach three.
collect earth, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's now how do you say, we are now in a collaboration with the CFRN,
Okay.
Coalition for Reforestation, and then they developed a land use application, which is kind of like Google Earth. Yeah.
Great.
Yes, right. Valentina's also here to justify that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like collector. Yeah.
Okay, it's different. It's used as okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. I've seen the use of the land use app tool that they have, but that's good. It's spatially explicit and yeah, I'm glad that you have that support
Yes.
from them. That's great.
CFRN. Yes. The only thing, Brittany, that we are trying to tackle is the part of logging activities.
Mm,
um, because so far we don't have those areas spatially explicit. We only have from now use the volume information of logging, roundwood production, to be able to calculate the emissions coming from logging activities. But we're working on having the area of logging more spatially explicit, uh, more in the case of avoiding double counting of that of those emissions.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose
So that is something I wanted to share. Yes.
no, that's very good. And I suppose it's quite difficult to visualize the difference between like just grassland or settlement versus logging activity or maybe clearing before agriculture. So I suppose it's quite challenging to discern that spatially, right? To set your boundaries when you're making your
So far, I think from what I've seen, it's doable to distinguish the logging activities from other land uses. Um, yeah, but with higher resolution, it's more clear for sure. But yeah.
okay, super. Good, but good. Thanks for sharing that. That's another one of the important categories under land use change, which I don't think we're covering. We're not covering that one in detail today. But it seems that you already, at least now, you currently have a source of that activity data, which is the volume of wood that's harvested, um, which is sufficient for now. But as I can see, it's on your list for improvement. Good to know. Okay, so these slides here are just showing you what the different approaches look like. So this is for approach one, where you have just the total change in area for each individual land use category. So you have in time one, in year one, you have forest is 18, grassland is 14 area, etc. At time two, you have you have a different share of what the different land use changes are. You just know how much forest you have, how much grassland you have, but you don't really know what this forest. You can know that forest has been gained. You can see that there's less grassland. You can see that there's less cropland now. And you can see that there's an increase in settlement, so S, but you don't know which of these turned into more settlement, for example. So that's approach one. And approach two is where you can see what the land use change matrix, what is the conversion between the different land use types. So forest land remaining forest land is pointer. Here's the pointer. Forest remaining forest, grassland remaining grassland, and then you can see how much grassland turned into forest, etc. And then at the final, you have the same total area. So you're always going back to the same total area that you're tracking from the start to time one, between time one and time two. And then this is the approach that you're using, where you have spatially explicit, so you can see land use conversions between the different forest types between time one and time two. And you can see this in a spatially explicit way. You can see exactly how settlement has increased. You can see where forest has decreased and turned more into grasslands, for example, or expanded into grasslands, etc. Okay, and very simply, the data that's needed for the FOLU sector is the area of forest and land remaining forest. And so the disaggregation of these into based on the climatic region, vegetation type, etc. And I know this is managed spatially and defined within the parameters that you use in your land use change tool using, I think you mentioned Google Earth Engine, right? You're using remote sensing using images from Google Earth and perhaps other satellites. Area of other land converted to forest land and the same segregation, forest area affected by disturbances. And Consuela talked a little bit about some of the different disturbances types. Area of forest burnt, forest area undergoing transition from one state to another. So not just in time one and time two, but forest area that's undergoing transition. These transition areas also have different amounts of emission potential and absorption potential. Total of forested land, so land that's forest has been regrown from cropland and grassland, and area of land converted to forest land through natural regeneration or plantations. And so far, I think most of your data is national data. So you're not, data that you collect yourselves, whether through remote sensing or through maps, right? And your harvesting of wood is from your round wood data that you collect yourself. But otherwise, sources of data could also be from international sources like FAO, in the absence of some of national data, not in your case. And then as you go forward, you can do more, you can go more in detail where you can have data disaggregated based on different forest types, plantation types. And then, yeah, you can even go further on to georeference some of these data. So that was for forest land, and this is activity data. This continues for forest land. So also commercial harvest. So this is for harvested wood products. So how much aggregate commercial harvest statistics, how much the volume of wood that you're harvesting for sale. That also has emissions. It's not emissions all at once, even though the tree is cut down. You lose some emissions, but you don't lose it because you still have carbon stored in furniture and in the log wood for the period of its lifetime, right? Fuel wood and other wood use. Other things to consider for data that you should collect, and I know this is already your colleagues in your forestry commission already well versed with these factors. So for example, annual biomass growth rate, carbon fraction of the different land use subcategories, biomass expansion ratio for above ground and below ground biomass, the ratio of above ground to below ground biomass. These are all things that you can, you can consider when you're going further into tier 2 and tier 3 for the different forest types that you have, especially, and then further into cropland, grassland as is relevant, right? But then if this is more relevant for your forest land. Okay. These are the same points here. Biomass group weight, carbon fraction, etc. And then you have similar data requirements for the different categories. So for cropland, you're looking at area converted annually. You're looking at the average area converted as a 10-year average. If you have, data that you can, project for 10 years, important. Sometimes it helps, to have some type of projection. You have above ground biomass before and after conversion. So this is getting more specific into cropland. Carbon dioxide, carbon fraction of biomass, fraction of biomass left to decay on cropland. So getting more and more specific as you go into higher tiers, above area of cropland, which is the basic. And so this is similar for these data requirements are similar for all of the other land uses, and the main one that is for all of them is the area converted annually. Yeah, this is the main approach. We haven't gone into detail. There's so many advanced details, advanced methodologies for estimating estimating emissions in this FOLU sector. But this is just the simple first order approach where you have a direct measurement of carbon fluxes, which is very difficult. You have extremely difficult because you have it's very heterogeneous, right? The terrestrial ecosystems, nothing is 100% the same. Things are changing all the time in the natural environment. So it's sometimes it's mostly challenging to calculate what's the flux of carbon, right? And the change of carbon stocks between different land use subcategories. But basically, to know the annual carbon stock change on land, you would have to know the change in carbon stock for each of the different land use subcategories. So how much annual carbon stock change you have for each of the different land use change types. Which is, carbon stock year in year one, and what it's like in year 2. So that's the change in carbon stock. And then there's also that's the change in carbon stock method, and then you have sum of gains and losses. So this is the gain loss method. So this is the second method where you have where the land use type, you can measure and see what portion of that is a disturbance, what portion of that is has a factor of growth for carbon uptake because it's growing, how much is harvested. So it gets a little bit more it gets more advanced as you go into the gain loss method. Yeah, so the stock difference method can be used when carbon stocks in the pools are measured at 2 points in time. So this is the more simplified approach. Commonly estimated from repeated field measurements the different forest variables, so that you know what the change of carbon stock is for the different in that carbon pool at that time. And then the gain loss method involves tracking inputs and outputs from carbon pools, right? So from growth, from increase of biomass, from transfer to another pool, for example, like from live biomass turning into dead organic matter, right? From decay, for example, due to harvest, due to natural disturbances. So this one shows all of the different fluxes during the lifetime, or what is expected within the lifetime of that land use category. One moment, colleague, sorry. Yeah, so we've covered the two main ways that you can estimate emissions and removals, right? So into two broad categories, where methods can be applied in a similar way for any of the land use types, and methods that can only apply to a single land use type at a time, right? Without the aggregate data on national level. I'm not sure. I don't recall from your inventory which of the two methods are mainly used, but I think you use gain loss method, right, for your forest inventory.
Gain loss.
Gain loss, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, colleagues. So, yeah. Any other questions on the activity data needed for forestry and other land use? I know you cover most of it. You use approach 3. You collect your data in a spatially explicit way. You have already tier 2 methods for your main forest category, for your mature forests, and you're working on the others, and you use the gain loss method. I think this is one of the most advanced sectors in your inventory, and I think you probably shouldn't have a problem working on the update. That's my assumption, of course. Okay. So let's go to the last one, and this one is a short one. We'll be looking at 3C, so on aggregate sources of and non-CO2 emissions on that. And here we are. This is what's covered, right? In 3C, we have emissions from biomass burning, liming, urea, direct and indirect emissions from managed soils. You also have indirect N2O emissions from manure management. So we're bringing back some of the emissions that we had from manure management in 3A, and then also rice cultivation. And so we'll be looking at the main data. Okay, so in the 2006 guidelines, fire is treated as a disturbance that affects not only the biomass, in particular above ground biomass, right? So everything that's growing above, trees, foliage, etc., but also the dead organic matter, so litter and dead wood, the components that are in the soil. So for this reason, you also have this falls under this soils category, right? Emission sources that are happening on land in soils. So emissions from fire include not only carbon dioxide, but also other greenhouse gases or precursors that result from incomplete combustion. So anytime you have combustion happening, your main emissions, excuse me, will be carbon dioxide, but you'll also have other non-CO2 emissions because of the incomplete oxidation of the burning of that fuel. So you'll have some methane, you'll have some carbon monoxide, and then you'll also have some nitrogen based emissions. And so for biomass burning, this is where you're accounting for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from fire. So the tons of each GHG. So this is whereby you multiply the area burnt, hectares, multiplied by the mass of the fuel available for combustion in tons. So this includes biomass, ground litter, deadwood, etc. And then the combustion factor. And so these factors you can get from the IPCC guidelines for the combustion factor for the type of biomass that's being burned. But the main activity data is the area burnt. So this data is sometimes challenging to obtain, especially if and also if you're already collecting this data spatially. You can use that area to calculate this emission from biomass burning. And there's liming and urea application. Earlier, I mentioned that in your last inventory, you don't have liming of soils as a category because that's not that doesn't occur, but you have urea application to your soils. And so these emissions occur when, as a result of carbon dioxide from the bicarbonates released from lime and urea applied to the soil. So lime and urea have a large bicarbonate component, and so when it's applied, there's a reaction, and you have carbon dioxide emitting. So the data that you need here to get these emissions is the annual amount of lime or urea applied per year. So that's tons per year, tons applied per year. And perhaps this data is available from your agriculture statistics or maybe customs if for importation of urea, for example. Okay. So the urea is applied to soils during fertilization and leads to the loss of carbon dioxide that was fixed in the industrial production process. This is if you are producing lime or if you're producing urea. But carbon dioxide is recovered. The carbon dioxide recovered for urea production is estimated in the IPPU sector. I don't think this is one that you don't have this category under your industrial processes because you're not a producer of urea. But if you were, then you would be able to separate these emissions from the production versus when you apply it to soils. So you have here for the basic activity data requirement for tier 1 is the domestic production records or the import-export data on urea so that you know how much urea is applied to soils per year on an annual basis. So this is the main assumption that you need to know. Perhaps you have import data. Maybe there's farmer data that farmers know how much urea they're applying to soils. Whatever information is available to know how much is actually applied to soils or what assumption you're making. And then there's the other source of emissions, which is the direct nitrous oxide emissions from managed soils. So N2O is produced naturally in soils through the process of nitrification and denitrification, where you have direct nitrogen inputs from soils when you're adding fertilizers, when you're adding different organic and inorganic soil additives. So it's brought. You have nitrogen nitrous oxide gas being produced both from directly from the soils where N is added, and also in direct pathways where you have, when it's interacting with the soil, you have some of those emissions that are volatilized, where you have different nitrogen related gases that are being produced, and also you have some that are leaching and that are running off of the soil. So these are the indirect pathways for these nitrous oxide emissions. And the IPCC guidelines provides different emission factors for both these two processes, but you're using the same activity data. Yes, question, go ahead.
Yes, just to understand the chemical process behind that, the reason why the natural process doesn't emit um, greenhouse gases but are N2O, but the anthropogenic one does. So the reason behind that, the chemical reactions.
Yeah, so even if it's organic, you still have emissions occurring. So if you have a manure on your soils, or if you're using synthetic fertilizers or urea, the addition of those to the soil, you have this nitrification process happening. And so as a result, when the crops are fixed and the crops are growing and the root and the plant is using the nitrogen, the actual N from the different fertilizers, whether it's organic or it's synthetic. In this case, you have some of the nitrogen being used, and then you have some that will remain in the soil and some that will leach if with water and runoff, for example, and you'll have some gas that will volatilize into the atmosphere after the crops have fixed and used what they want from the fertilizer.
If I can just, I think I misunderstood your point. I think in the previous slide, it stated the emissions of N2O due to anthropogenic N inputs occur through. So I thought that the emissions were only due to anthropogenic N inputs, so not from the naturally produced ones in the soil. Yeah, I think I misinterpreted your slide.
Yeah. In this case, it'd be considered anthropogenic because it's a intentional activity. If you're adding fertilizer, whether it's manure from livestock, or if it's fertilizer of some sort. So that it's what you can track. Otherwise, we're not accounting for the nitrogen that's already existing in the soil. Although that does have some emissions, but you have this is just from the direct input, because I suppose you wouldn't have the same productivity in your crops without the addition of these fertilizers. But that's a good question. I've actually never thought of it like that. Yes, Anjali?
Yeah. A few years ago, I used to get a lot of data from the Ministry of Agriculture on the, not actually the use of fertilizers and pesticides, but the what is imported.
Mm-hmm.
I think only a census, an agriculture census, might give you an estimation of what is actually being used. So can we use, if there's nothing available, can we again use data from the imports? Because import data we have annually as a proxy, like a rough proxy.
Mm-hmm.
But the use, you would have to really do a survey. And sometimes the farmers don't even know the amount they are using. So you have to really
Mm-hmm.
estimate. So I'm just asking if you can use the imports data.
Yes, you can
As
use
a,
that as a proxy, yeah.
yeah.
Or you can use that as your main source of data, and you make the assumption that what you're importing, uh,
It's probably used.
is probably used on soils.
Okay.
So it's not a perfect assumption, because maybe you have some that's left in stock that's not used for that
Yeah.
year. But it's yes, you can use that. You just
Yeah.
need to state in the report that that's the assumption you're making.
So that data we do have then, in case we only have that. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, very good. A great question. So the main activity data required is the synthetic fertilizers, how much is used per year. So this is in tons, for example, or kilograms or whatever. And then you should also know, based on the type of fertilizer, the nitrogen input. So the IPCC guidelines provide some guidance as to how much nitrogen is within each type of synthetic fertilizer. So this might be where you get more of a challenge when you get the list of fertilizers. That's the first step, and then you need to know how much nitrogen, or what's the chemical equation to see how much nitrogen is in each of those types of fertilizers that you're using. But I think you have the first step, so that's good. Okay, good. I see more data in the chat. Okay, so we won't go through this because we said it's the same. The annual amount of fertilizers you're applying to the soil is the main type. And for indirect, the difference, it's the same activity data that you're using for the quantity of fertilizers that you're using. You'll just be using different emission factors for what percentage would be volatilized versus what percentage would be leached and run off. So the IPCC guidelines provides values for each of those types of activities for indirect N2O emissions. It's just for information. Yeah, data requirements are the same. I think this is the last one on rice. So I know this is looking at your greenhouse gas inventory. I see that rice is a large source of emissions also in your agriculture sector. And emissions happen, and it's mainly it's methane emissions only that are occurring, where you have the anaerobic decomposition of the organic material, especially in flooded rice fields, producing methane, and this escapes to the atmosphere through the rice plants itself. And so the annual amount is dependent on the rice cultivation, the number, the duration of crops grown, soil type, etc. So the type CH4 emissions, you get it from the annual methane emissions. Okay. See, some of our colleagues need to leave. Thank you very much. Thanks, Consuela. Happy weekend. Yeah, but the main data that bye. Yeah, the main data you need for rice cultivation is the annual harvested area of rice, and then you should also know what the different type of water regime it's using, right? So these are some of the systems here. So what's the area that's being cultivated, and then also know of the total area, what percentage is irrigated, rain-fed, upland rice. And I know your agriculture experts would possibly know and would track how many fields are using this, the different systems. Crops, I see this is in kg. Yeah, the data that you would need for rice would be area of the farms where the crop plantation is. So the harvested area statistics.
We have area also. I'm gonna check. There's area and there is a production in
Of
kg.
production. Okay, perfect. So in this case for emissions, we'd be looking at area because you might have different production for different, based on different productivity, what you use, etc. And then the different rice cropping practices. So I'm sure this is available as well. Colleagues, I think yes. I think this is it. That's it for agriculture, forestry, and other land use. I know it was a long session, a lot of detailed information. But I thank you for your time and listening, and also as usual the support for sharing data in the chat, which is very helpful. And I can see also that you have for different types of annual and perennial crops in terms of hectares, in terms of area. So I think you'll be very I think it'll be smooth sailing to get data for this sector.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a clarification question. Maybe I wasn't listening attentively. That from the rice, the emissions from the rice is not due to the fertilizers, right? It's just due to the method of planting
Yeah.
because it's flooded.
Yeah, that's the main reason. So they produce methane emissions because of the way they're grown, and yeah, because it's water, you have these methane emissions that are produced. Also the type.
Anaerobic
Yeah, exactly.
decomposition. I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Jerman, a vraag, a question. Did you contact Adron? Who's playing that? Adron is an institute responsible for all the rice, anything that has to do with rice in Nikeri. Nikeri is one of our biggest districts where rice is produced, Brittany. And there is a specific organization. It is part of the Ministry of Agriculture, but knowing exactly the amount of water or whatever is being used, we could also maybe see if we could get Adron information from Adron.
So that in the last cycle we sent out, we didn't approach them, but way back we approached them, but didn't get reaction.
Oh, okay.
No, but we did approach them in the beginning.
But you didn't get a reaction from them. Okay.
No response.
Okay. Okay, we'll keep in contact then, Brittany.
Okay.
And everything that I posted, I have them all in Excel files. So I'm just gonna I'm also gonna do that for Jermaine and Ifeta. I'm just gonna collect all the data from, if I have from 2000 until now, in one Excel, and I'll share that with all of you. So whenever we're going to start filling out the tool, we have it in an Excel file. I'll do that from my part. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Brittany, for this session again.
Yes.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.